But breastfeeding experience as well can have a huge impact, and you don't forget them easily, and they can shape who you are as a mother and are very much part of your journey with that baby.
Welcome to another episode of my podcast. Today I'm speaking with Caoimhe Whelan, an IBCLC, about her recently published research entitled Mothers' Emotional Experiences of Breastfeeding with Primary Low Milk Supply. Most new moms are often surprised with the depth of emotion they feel in postpartum, especially if breastfeeding challenges arise. Caoimhe describes how standard breastfeeding classes often paint a picture of postpartum bliss and glossing over potential difficulties, leaving mothers distressed and compromising their mental health. Caoimhe's work highlights the emotional challenges mothers face and the importance of accurate information and compassionate support. On my website, you can find free mindful breastfeeding resources that offer tools to help mothers regulate this emotional turmoil while navigating breastfeeding challenges and protecting their mental health. Join us as we explore the emotional depths of breastfeeding with low milk supply. And now I bring you Caoimhe Whelan.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of my podcast. And I'm delighted to welcome Caoimhe Whelan, who is coming to us today from Dublin. Caoimhe is a IBCLC and has been involved in, I think, the birth world for quite a long time. I think in the beginning from yoga teaching and...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you've kind of watched the whole what's going on in Ireland and breastfeeding rates for a long time now. So share a little bit about, I guess, how you went from teaching yoga to becoming an IBCLC.
Yeah, I suppose like a lot of IBCLCs, I sort of meandered into the profession because it's not really a straightforward route to becoming an IBCLC. As I'm sure you're aware, I originally started my career as an electrical engineer about 100 years ago. But anyway, long story short, I changed career and I was teaching yoga for a long time. And I taught pregnancy yoga. And then when I had my first baby over 16 years ago, I sort of fell into breastfeeding. And I started attending my local Quidgy breastfeeding support group. And I got so much from it myself. And I went on to train as a voluntary breastfeeding counsellor. So from there, I took the Pathway 1 route to IBCLC certification, and I qualified as an IBCLC in 2016. So I've been working in private practice in South Dublin since then.
Lucky families to have you on their doorstep. Yeah. And then you do a little bit of lecturing as well in UCD.
Yeah, I do just a little bit. There's a postgraduate course in UCD. It was Denise McGuinness. She's an assistant professor in UCD, and she got this course off the ground, and it's for healthcare professionals and IBCLCs. There'll be a lot of public health nurses, midwives, doctors, dietitians, IBCLCs as well, who do it. It's a certificate course in breastfeeding and lactation, so I do a little bit of teaching on that as well.
Yeah, I've seen the reviews of the course are fantastic, so everyone seems to love it.
It's really, really fantastic. It's great for breastfeeding families now in Ireland that not only sort of midwives and lactation consultants have knowledge about breastfeeding and lactation, but other healthcare professionals as well. So it's great to see that happening.
So speaking of education and training, you and Denise O'Brien and Abby Hyde published this fabulous paper recently. Congratulations on getting it published. I know how difficult that is.
Yeah.
I feel your pain.
I've ever done.
Yeah. Did you have to do a lot of revisions, or it's?
I'll just quickly tell you how the process worked. And it was all new to me because, this is my first peer-reviewed publication. So going back to 2020, I decided I wanted to do research on women's experiences of breastfeeding with primary low milk supply. So I ended up doing a master's by research through the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems in UCD. And my supervisors were Denise O'Brien and Abby Hyde, and they were both fabulous. And it was a very involved, very intense, all-consuming experience for me. I have to say, I learned so much in the process. It was a very rewarding experience, very challenging as well. You know, when you're in research and doing a thesis, a master's, you know, through your thesis. So I graduated then June 2023, and then in September I started working on publishing my research. So it's one thing to actually do your research and write your thesis and get your master's. The next step then is to actually publish. So I put that article together in September last year, and then went back and forth with Abby and Denise, and there were some minor changes. And once we felt we had a final draft, we submitted it to Breastfeeding Medicine. So then there's a little bit of a wait. They came back to us and said, yes, we'd send this for peer review. So it goes for peer review. And then there were some major revisions, did all the revisions, and that goes back to Breastfeeding Medicine and back to the peer reviewers. And there were some other little edits, and then it came back to me again. And then went back to Breastfeeding Medicine and dealt with one of their in-house editors. And anyway, long story short, so from writing an article in September, it finally got published in March of this year. And that's just how academic publishing works. You know, things don't happen fast.
Oh gosh, I would say, to submit a paper in September and have it published now is like warp speed. Like it is. I think it depends. Like when we did our research with McMaster University in Canada, and if we finished it up, it was kind of the tail end of COVID, I think it was. But because of when you're submitting documents, you can only submit to one journal at a time, and because of the backlog of we were waiting 6 months to hear back on the paper, and then it just kept getting pushed out. So we have got final. It is going to be published. We're waiting on a date, but all the coming back in the iterations, and I was like, it's never going to get published. But finally, it took a while. But I do want to talk to you about this paper, and I from what I've read in it, there was only one other paper published before yours that was exploring women's experiences of having this particular concern.
So when in 2020, when I just had this idea to do this research, I felt there was what we call a gap in the literature on, I suppose, qualitative research on women's experiences of breastfeeding with primary low milk supply. And even there's very little quantitative research as well. It just seemed like it didn't really exist. There were studies on breastfeeding difficulties, but they didn't really sort of address that experience of having low milk supply. There was one other paper, I can't remember what year it was now. It was a researcher called Erin Farah did, I think it was her PhD on women's experiences of low milk supply. Which so there was just very little there. So just when an idea starts to germinate,
percolate,
So I actually contacted Denise McGuinness because I knew she had done a master's by research, and she put me in touch with Professor Abby Hyde, and I got in touch with her. I said, I have this idea, I'd love to do this research, and from there I went on to apply to do the master's by research.
So tell me tell me what is primary low milk supply for anyone who is not in the know.
So if we look at sort of low milk supply in general, there's sort of three broad categories. One is perceived low milk supply, and we hear an awful lot about this. And if you look at the research, there's lots of studies that talk about perceived low milk supply, and it is common where women, because of maybe lack of knowledge about breastfeeding and normal newborn behaviour, they perceive or they have this feeling that they're just not making enough milk. But maybe it's cluster feeding, or there's lots of reasons why they might have that feeling that they're not making enough milk for their baby. So that's perceived low milk supply. But sometimes it's real. And when low milk supply is actually a problem, it's going to be either secondary, which is extrinsic. So something happening outside of the mother. It could be suboptimal breastfeeding. The baby isn't removing milk optimally, so that's caused a decrease in supply. Or it could be maybe medications she's taken that have affected her supply. But it's different from primary low milk supply because it's intrinsic. So it's something to do with the mother's physiology or her anatomy, which is the root cause of her body's inability to make enough milk to exclusively breastfeed a baby. And generally with secondary low milk supply, we can turn things around, with some focus and addressing what the issue is. And sometimes it's as simple as the mother hasn't been doing enough breastfeeding, or the baby is sleepy, or it's, sometimes it's quite straightforward. With primary low milk supply, it's there isn't an easy fix, and it's just not possible to wave a magic wand and to make everything okay. So it's challenging for mothers who had intended to exclusively breastfeed and assumed that everything would be okay. And I mean, you sure know this yourself, Tracy. Like, before women even have their baby, they start to, imagine who they're going to be as a mother, and this sort of motherhood self-identity starts to take shape. And breastfeeding is part of that, and not just breastfeeding, but exclusive breastfeeding. And so many of the women that I interviewed, they were very, very attached to this idea of exclusively breastfeeding and it being the best, and how, or even who they wanted to be. And they visualized themselves as mothers who were exclusively breastfeeding. So when they subsequently discovered that this was just not going to be possible for them, I mean, they were devastated and in shock. Very, very difficult for them to come to terms with. And they were faced with a whole raft of emotions like guilt and grief and trauma and disappointment and a deep sense of loss, not just of sort of a way of breastfeeding, but also the loss of an identity they had hoped they would have.
Hey there, if you're enjoying this conversation and are passionate about evidence-based care in labour, the best way to support our work is to subscribe and share this episode with other amazing women in your life. Your support is so important to us and helps us reach more mothers with empowering content. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button and spread the love.
Yeah, it's when I'm reading just through some of the comments that you pulled out of the interviews are just heartbreaking. It's it is, and one of the moms said something about, like, she wanted the whole experience. Like, you do have this idea of, I want the whole shebang. I want to be that mother, this idea that you have. And then when it's not, it's just, and that idea, and again, because I see it kind of in the birth work of this idea of just knowing, that feeling like, of course I'm going to breastfeed. We've been doing this for, a million years, and it should be easy. And then you meet something like this that just pulls the world out from under you. And what motherhood in your mind looks like then it's just a huge shift then. And unfortunately the shift is into one of not, I guess, because again, and I'm always banging on about this, Caoimhe, about, we're not giving moms the tools to emotionally regulate themselves, to kind of be able to stand back and look at your own thinking and go, is that really true? Or am I believing something now that's just making things harder for me? It's really difficult, but some of the women's experiences were just, especially at the midwife, and the reasons as well, like for some of them, like, who had PCOS, and I was thinking, oh, did nobody like link these from her background, that PCOS could mean there's a hormonal issue here, there could be something more. And I think another mom had a postpartum hemorrhage, and I was like, well, that's definitely another well-known reason that we know there could be. So I'm like, is there, what's the disconnect that the GP wasn't even linking this together?
It's complicated for sure. I suppose there is a kind of a narrative, or certainly there has been, that all women can breastfeed, and in Norway or whatever, 99%
I was
of
about to
women
say
can
that.
breastfeed. But I remember hearing that when I was a breastfeeding mother, and certainly when I was a breastfeeding counsellor with Cuidu, I wasn't really aware of primary low milk supply. And then when I started working in private practice, I started seeing all these cases, primary low milk supply, in particular IGT. But it was something I had not seen at voluntary breastfeeding support groups. And I just became very interested in it. But I think also in Ireland, because we've had such a big push over the last 10 years to increase breastfeeding rates, and there's been a lot of really positive initiatives, and things certainly are better, and we're moving in the right direction. But I think with breastfeeding education, the tendency has been to say, it's great and breastfeeding and everything it's wonderful, and there's so many benefits, but we also need to be realistic and talk about the challenges, and talk about the other dimensions to breastfeeding that very often women don't expect, like the sort of embodied dimensions to being a breastfeeding person. So what I found with the women that I interviewed, it was like they just couldn't wrap their head around the fact that there was so much more to breastfeeding. And they'd say things like, I just can't even explain it to you. This thing, like they struggled to understand why they had such a deep desire to breastfeed. It was sort of beyond them almost.
Yeah.
So I feel we need to have more conversations around what a big thing breastfeeding can be, and infant feeding in general. I mean, a bit like birth as well. The nature of your birth can affect you or leave a lasting impression for the rest of your life. But breastfeeding experience as well can have a huge impact, and you don't forget them easily, and they can shape who you are as a mother, and are very much part of your journey with that baby.
And so how common is it? So if someone's watching today and they're thinking, oh, I think that's me. I mean, what are we looking at here? Like what would be, I guess, signs that somebody is experiencing this? And are there any risk factors, anything that someone could figure out in pregnancy and know they might need extra support? Or
I mean, look, most women will make enough milk to exclusively breastfeed if they're supported, and they do all the right things, and there's plenty of feeding in the early days. But there is a small cohort who will not. Now, I have to say, in my experience working in private practice, about 95% of the primary low milk supply cases I see are women who have insufficient glandular tissue. I'll come back to that in a sec, but I mean, there are other sort of hormonal issues that are sort of red flags for low milk supply. Like you mentioned, PCOS. I find most women who have PCOS can make enough milk to exclusively breastfeed. But when we see PCOS alongside IGT, that's going to be problematic. Look, there are some studies, animal studies, which suggest thyroid issues can affect lactation. Again, most of the people that I see who have thyroid issues can exclusively breastfeed. And there are other hormonal conditions that can influence your body's ability to lactate and to make enough milk to exclusively breastfeed. But I feel primarily it's insufficient glandular tissue is the issue. Now, around 5%, but there's very little research on that to really sort of say with certainty. There are a few studies, but somewhere between 4 and 6%, which is not insignificant.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And if you're in that 4 to 6%, it is pretty significant to you.
Yeah, and women who have IGT, they need to know that this is a thing, and because a lot of the women I spoke to, they felt they were dismissed. They weren't really being taken seriously. A lot of healthcare professionals had never heard of IGT, or they were sort of half given information from some people, but they were sort of left to their own devices in a way. and I found it very, very frustrating. But one thing that they really didn't appreciate was being told that IGT is very rare. They found that very dismissive. What they really need to know is, no, this exists. Some women have this. You are not on your own. And people need to hear that message. You are not on your own. There are other people like you.
And I'll put my hand up here because I know I have been that midwife and that doula as well that has I'm sure I know I've said that it's very, very rare. Now, also saying that I have never worked with a client who ended up who had IGT, so touch wood, because how that mother might be feeling and me dismissing her concerns as, oh, well, Sweden and Norway do it, and they don't seem to have this problem.
Yeah, but also women are very sort of sensitive to tone and language and how things are said. So they can on the one hand say she was really, really lovely and kind, but she didn't know about this. So it depends on how you say something.
Yeah.
It's not just about the words. Even it's the same,
of course,
supporting people birthing and so on. There's something about that time around the time of birth and in the early postpartum period where women are very, I think, highly attuned to language.
Yeah, well, not just language, but with people's micro expressions as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Although we're not conscious of it, we know that something's not quite adding up. One aspect I found really fascinating in your paper was the peer support groups. They got their, they got their stuff together. They're giving good information, and it's staff who don't have enough breastfeeding education or don't care about it. But it was interesting to see that even within the peer support groups, there was this idea of just put the baby on the boob, just boob, and that'll fix it. Yeah. And I think those women also feeling like, where am I getting good information? Because my healthcare provider is saying one thing, and then my peer support is saying another thing. There's so really for women to find their way at the moment.
Yeah. Well, look, we are all learning, and I think in the last 5 or 6 years, in particular here in Ireland, when women who are faced with breastfeeding difficulties, because they're sort of more linked in with social media and have more access to information, rather than sort of accepting breastfeeding is difficult or that it's not going to work for them or that they don't have enough milk, being very persistent about getting help. And breastfeeding rates are rising in Ireland. So we're seeing more women who maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have pursued help and support for IGT. So it might seem like it's become a big issue recently, but I think it's actually the fact that the women who have IGT are not settling for just formula feeding, or they're saying, no, I want help with this. I want information. I want support. So look, yeah, we are all learning, and I certainly didn't know much about IGT or probably anything when I was a breastfeeding counsellor. But this is why I wanted to do the research and have it published, because I mean that's a very important piece. It's only when it's peer reviewed then that it can feed into guidelines or policies, and help sort of eventually raise awareness in a sort of a broader
across the board.
Yeah.
And how have the maternity units taken the new research? Is everybody realizing, we've got a gap in our knowledge too that we need to learn more about so we can support these moms?
When I self-funded my master's, it cost me around €10,000 to do my research master's, and I was happy to pay for that, and I'm privileged that I was able to afford to do that. It was the only way that I was going to be able to do this research, because I didn't know anything about research, so I had to sort of get myself into that, into academia, and learn how to do it and then do it. But I can't really speak to how things work in maternity units and in the universities, it's not that easy to do independent research, unless you're supported by your employer, whether it's a hospital
Sure.
or, you're in academia. It isn't always easy to get funding, and some of the big studies being done at the moment are funded by industry. You follow the money, and it could be some company looking to research a probiotic for mothers that's going to support breastfeeding or whatever it is. There's always it's complicated, but personally, I feel we do need more independent research and more qualitative research on mothers' experiences, and also I suppose when I applied to do the masters and wanted to do the research, I felt also that lactation consultants in private practice are underrepresented in the literature, and we have a wealth of experience. Not to disparage any other lactation consultants or any other professions, but we would spend 1.5 to 2 hours with a mother in a consultation, and I think it opens you up to the depth of the kind of experience that women can have with breastfeeding, and breastfeeding difficulties in particular, because we see all the difficult cases.
And of course,
it's not all lovely breastfeeding all the time. It's, you're seeing trauma and difficulties, and I sort of felt that some of that needed to have voice in the research as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really a good point there that what you're seeing in the community is quite different to what staff are seeing in hospital, especially because we've got women that are discharged fairly soon, and they might just think that, oh, I just don't have enough milk, and that's it, and because there's always going to be a cohort of moms who have decided, I'm not fussed either way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some mothers aren't that bothered. I think with my participants, probably by virtue of the fact that they contacted me to become participants, they felt strongly. With primary low milk supply, often it won't become apparent until about a week or 2 or 3 when the baby fails to regain their birth weight. So, depending on, some of the hospitals provide support up to 6 weeks, but a lot of lactation consultants and midwives may not see primary low milk supply if they're only seeing mothers and their babies in the first week.
Based on the findings from your research, like what needs to change so women are more aware of the reality of IGT, and what do we need to do now that we have some really good information?
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the research as well, was because I was seeing the same thing over and over and over again. These mothers who would come to me and they have a plan where they're, feeding their baby 8 times a day, then pumping after every feed, and then bottle feeding the baby, and you can saw it in the paper yourself, like it drove a lot of these mothers to the edge. They were just completely demented, and to the point where it really compromised their mental health, and not only their mental health, but their experience of being in the postpartum period, and anxiety levels. And one mother said she was on the verge of OCD. A couple of the mothers described that how they were so anxious that they feared that their babies would be taken into custody. And, that gives you some idea of just sort of the headspace that they were in, like just total fear and anxiety, and just this sort of hamster wheel of constantly doing something. So they're either pumping, they're feeding, and they just sort of lose sight of everything else. And I remember one mum saying to me, I couldn't even tell you what my baby was like. I couldn't tell you if she was a happy baby or she was an easygoing baby. She said, I couldn't even see her. It was just one of the saddest things I heard, from participants, that she was so caught up in this regime of triple feeding that she could not see her baby. So I think it's a really important finding from the research We, we need to sort of recommend with caution and be mindful of the mother's experience of being a mother, and factor in her mental health, and time to just enjoy her baby as well. So sometimes that can mean a compromise. And I know it's not straightforward, but we need to be more mindful of that. So that needs to change. I think the other thing, there's lots of things that need to change, but I think certainly in antenatal breastfeeding classes, there needs to be just a little bit more on breastfeeding difficulties and some of the potential challenges that mothers might face. And I suppose it's finding a balance between positive about, breastfeed, it's great, but also saying, but it's hard. But it isn't just breastfeeding that's hard. It's that whole postpartum. Time can be hard, or lack of support is hard, or your change in identity is hard, and postpartum emotions are hard. So
it's going to be a hard time, no matter what way you feed your baby. Postpartum is postpartum. There's no fast forwards through it. Did anything from your findings? Did anything surprise you at all?
I was quite surprised at just the depth of feeling that mothers had. Sort of very profound, embodied feeling about breastfeeding. I remember Mum saying it's like an animalistic feeling, or it's something. They would say primal. A couple of the mothers used that word primal, but they couldn't understand their own strength of feeling about breastfeeding, and it kind of really blew them away. That they almost felt guilty for having that strong feeling about breastfeeding. So, I think it's important to talk about this as well, that breastfeeding can have a lot more meaning than often people expect. And the anger as well, that was, I was really struck by that, the anger that women expressed about some of their interactions with healthcare professionals, midwives, pediatricians, IBCLCs, right across, the board, and how they remembered some of those experiences. They'll remember one sentence or one word that somebody said to them, and it's like a wound that goes really deep. And I remember my mother-in-law, who's 92, she could still now talk you through the details of the births of her 4 babies, going back to the 1950s and 60s, and how she was treated and things people said to her. And I feel with these women that I interviewed, and perhaps other women who've had difficult breastfeeding experiences, and as a result, difficult interactions with healthcare professionals, will also, somehow those experiences will live in them forever and be part of their story with their baby.
I remember reading a paper a couple of years ago, and it was about, things that are said to breastfeeding mums about their baby that influences how they see their own baby. And it was, I think it was this something about, I think the name of the paper was something about, little piranhas or something like that. Like when as healthcare providers, when we, give this baby an identity, calling it, oh, little piranha, he's a hungry little monster, isn't he? That parents
or he's lazy.
And they were going home and using the same words around family members or when talking about the baby. And we have to be so really mindful about, because, in that postpartum, not even into postpartum, but women they're just, marinating in all of this information from so many different people, and we don't know what's going to stick.
Exactly.
But I think if we could have staff talking about what a brilliant breastfeeder our baby is, and what a natural nursing baby we have, rather than the piranha or the little monster, the hungry little grubber and this kind of thing.
And I also think that there needs to be greater emphasis on open-ended questions, communication skills, counselling skills, active listening. for staff to not feel that they always have to fix everything. And I think that's that sort of biomedical perspective that has influenced breastfeeding support. Like, you do it like this, you align your baby like this. No, he has to be straight, push the head in, do this, do that.
The mechanics.
But that everything's so quantitative and, empirical. But I really feel that insofar as breastfeeding support is concerned, there needs to be more, how does that feel? Can you tell me about that? What do you think is going on? How can I help you? What have you heard about that? What would you like to do? What's the most important thing to you? That sort of line of questioning where the healthcare professional is listening and learning from the mother. And I certainly found from my own experience working in private practice, when you give people space and you just hold space for people without even any intention of trying to fix anything, so much can come to the surface. And I know in the context of a private lactation consultation, it's a whole lot easier than when you're in a hospital setting and you just have a few minutes with somebody and everything's very rushed. And I mean, that's the big problem here. The postnatal staffing levels, staff are under immense pressure. So
I know it's kind of like you're swimming upstream, or swimming against the current. We're trying to get really good information into parents antenatally and preparing them for, the reality of the postnatal ward is you're not going to get a huge amount it'll depend on the day. You might not get a huge amount of help. It'll depend on how many, inductions they've had, how many cesareans they've had, and whether you can really get quality breastfeeding support on the day.
There's a lack of mentoring as well. I really feel for a lot of it, like new midwives, student midwives who go onto the ward. There isn't a mentoring system. And there should be, really, in an ideal world. I know a lot of this is idealistic, but we have to keep pushing.
Or we could, have our student midwives go on placement, go to a couple of Lesh League meetings and go to a couple of Quidju meetings and actually sit and observe and just watch, because they would learn so much just being around the experts. So. Yeah, because I think as for new student midwives, there's a lot of fear around breastfeeding education and what you should you be touching the mom or not touching the mom, and so if you have students that are more confident themselves, they will be the ones that will jump in, but if they're not confident, like, how do you build that confidence?
To give people the confidence to not be afraid to be a beginner and to have a beginner's mind, and even still now, I will sometimes call a colleague or say to a mother, God, I don't know a whole lot about that. Would you mind if I spoke to one of my colleagues? She has more experience with this. And to ask questions and say, look, I don't know, can you tell me? And also to regard the mother as the expert in, you know what I mean? So for medical people and for midwives to not be afraid to say, you know what, I don't know. What have you read about it? Have you looked this up? Can you tell me about it? What are you feeling? Which is probably, in stark contrast to how medical people are trained to.
Yeah, there is that feeling of you should have all the answers. Anything that falls below that is like, then I'm not, I don't have a professional level of knowledge in this area. And then you're panic and you're kind of stepping back then. Caoimhe, where can people find you on social media so they can find you and your paper and your clinic?
I am on Instagram at latch.ie, I think.
I think it is. Yeah, I will include it all in the show notes too.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, my website is www.latch.ie. But I run a support group once a month for women who have low milk supply. and we do it on Zoom. I have another lactation consultant, Kirsten Kaloran, who has come on board and is helping me with that. And it's a lovely group. We usually have mothers from Ireland and the UK, and we have had people from Canada and various European countries as well. And more than anything, for the mothers who attend, it's such a relief to know that they're not on their own. And other people have felt the same things that they have felt. And that group has been going for nearly 3 years now, and it's
fantastic.
It's great. And there's also a WhatsApp support group for the mothers. I'm not in it. There's no IBCLCs in it. It's peer support, and they really mind each other and give the other moms so much support. So it's a great little community.
Lovely. I will, if you share those details with me, and I will share them on the podcast for everybody. Caoimhe, thank you so much for your work in research, and I hope have you decided on what your next research project is going to be? Now you've been bitten by the bug.
I'm starting my second paper. So with the research that I did in my thesis, there were 4 broad themes that I wrote about, and the paper that you have in front of you there, that was one of them. So the other themes, one was embodiment, the embodied experience of being a mother who has primary low milk supply. Another looked at the experience of transitioning to motherhood in sort of in the shadow of primary low milk supply. And then another paper looked at the women's experiences of being with other people. So interactions with healthcare professionals, IBCLCs, voluntary support groups, and partners and other mothers. Hopefully before the end of the year I'll publish another paper. I'm just trying to work myself up to getting stuck in, It's
I know it is.
It's
a huge commitment. It really is. But I think so. This first paper, was this the that Life in a Whirlwind? Was that kind of based on this?
The theme that I called it in my thesis was being in the whirlwind. It was just that sense of sort of being caught up, and really was sort of the first 3 to 4 months. But just to finish on a positive note, these mothers did go on to have, most of them had really good breastfeeding experiences ultimately, but it just took a while to get there, and they all ultimately were very proud of what they'd achieved, and eventually came to recognize how much work they'd put into breastfeeding. It just took a while, I would say about a year to get to that point.
Yes, but it's a long time when you think of the first year of your baby's life.
I know,
and how quickly that year is gone, and how much of it we do or don't remember of it based on kind of where we were mentally. In those couple of months. But that is great to hear. Then, if any of them are watching, thank you so much for participating in the research, because I know it's a big deal.
They were so amazing, and they shared so much with me. I learned so much from them. Those interviews, it was a lot of crying, and I got emotional as well, because a lot of the emotions that came up, like shame and grief and loss and anger, they're universal. So we all have experience of those emotions in different contexts. I have to say, on a personal level, it was a very profound experience, and a privilege to hear those stories.
So for any of those moms watching, thank you so much for participating and sharing your experiences with Caoimhe. We look forward to another maybe a 3-part series of this research, Caoimhe.
Fingers crossed. And Tracy, thanks so much for inviting me on to speak about it. It's one thing to do the research, but then when somebody asks you to talk about it, it's hard to stop.
This is it. This is
great.
It's like, we could talk all day. There were so many aspects of this paper, but for those of you out there interested, please go and read Caoimhe's paper. I'll link all of the details below. Really, it's a very special paper, I think, understanding women's lived experiences with dealing with low milk supply and learning about IGT as well. So, Caoimhe, thank you again.
Thanks so much, Tracy.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Remember, empowerment begins with knowledge. If you enjoyed our time together and want more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. So stay inspired, stay informed, and until next time, take care of yourself.